Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to look at Bach's C major Toccata. And we're not looking at so much at the individual performance practice details today, but more at how this wonderful work can be made to stand out, how we can put it across as it really is. You know, I was so very fortunate as a student all those many years ago to have as my tutor one of the great authorities on 18th century music, and it was a wonderful inspiration. I think there were only two occasions when I disagreed with him about anything at all, and one of those two occasions was about this piece. He didn't like it. It really wasn't worthy of Bach's genius. It wasn't a serious work. It wasn't something that we really ought to look up to. And maybe he was right about that, but even so, I really like the piece. It bubbles with undergraduate humour, and I suppose I've just not grown up yet, because I still love it very much. Technically, it's just called the Toccata in C, but it's generally known as the Toccata Adagio and Fugue in C. It's really owes a great deal to Buxtehude and to the North German school. Like those, it is sectional. It explores all the different parts of the organ. Those big toccatas and preludes and fugues of the North German school typically use the various divisions of the organ in their own characteristic ways. So the Hauptwerk will have big chords. There will be a pedal solo very often using the features of the pedal division. There'll be scale passages, often on the positive or the Oberwerk, and there'll be a bit of fugue and perhaps a slow section using the lyrical stops on the organ. And all those things are present also in this piece. And that's one reason why it's so similar to that North German school. But what the difference is here is that Bach takes all these features and blows them up, makes them even more pronounced than, for example, Buxtehude did. So his sections are longer and he does more exciting, more imaginative things with those various features. We talked a little bit about this once before in our episode on Durch Adams Fall, where Buxtehude's prelude on the same melody contains so very many of the features, the melodic features and the techniques that Bach's Orgelbüchlein prelude does as well. It's just that Bach does it so much more. He turns it up a great deal more. And we see the same thing here. So where Buxtehude writes, for instance, in the C major Toccata, the one with the chaconne, Buxtehude has a pedal solo which is very similar in design to this pedal solo, but Bach does so much more. It's not just that Bach's is longer, it's I think 17 bars or something of very long, very dense figuration, but Bach uses all kinds of things, including triplet semiquavers in that long scale going from the very top to the very bottom of the pedal board, and features which we look at absolutely aghast when we see it the first time. And similarly, as for the fugue, well, we'll come back to the fugue later. As I suggested at the beginning, this episode is slightly different from our standard format. I usually look at specific performance practice details. I'm not going to do that today for a number of reasons. First of all, there isn't time. This is a really big piece and I want to focus on different things. Secondly, many of the people who are playing this piece are not beginners exactly. They've probably been playing for a while and they have their own ideas and are probably preparing this piece either for a concert performance or for a moderately high exam, an FRCO or something like that, or as an audition for a job or an organ scholarship or whatever it may be. And therefore, the things which are most interesting just today are how to make it sound good. It's going to sound good anyway, but how to make it sound extra good. And my first and most important point about this piece is we must not take it too seriously. It is fun. It is one big joke. And all the performance aspects can reflect that in different ways. One of those ways is tempo. I'm always saying don't play Bach too fast. We really need to give it time. Here I will play faster than I usually do, simply because this is a youthful piece. It is, as I say, an undergraduate kind of piece. And I think that Bach is potentially showing off a little bit even. But at any rate, he's parked his wig on a chair and he's letting his hair down and is enjoying himself. And I think we can just ease off the restraint a little bit here, throw ourselves into it, and really enjoy putting the jokes across. And that's one reason why I'm playing the piece today on a bigger and brasher organ than the ones which I usually use in the series. This is a modern Dutch-built Baroque organ in Stavanger Cathedral. A very brash sound, and a sound I think which suits this piece very well. But you can play it on any instrument, including a one manual instrument. We don't automatically think of playing this piece on a one manual instrument because it's such a big work, but I did so just a few weeks ago. I played a North German early Baroque organ with one manual, and the piece works absolutely fine. Even the slow movement is disposed in such a way that there are no finger crossings. It works perfectly on one manual. So this work really will stand up on any instrument that you choose. So the first two sections, the opening scales and that pedal solo, they're obviously not going to be exactly metrical. They are demonstrative. We're demonstrating something. We're playing in a very free and expressive toccata manner. That applies to the rests as well. The rests are not necessarily going to be precisely metrical. Have you noticed, by the way, that those two opening sections start in a sense, a rather a similar way? They both say something and then stop, almost as though they're saying, what should we do next? Where should we go now? Oh yes, let's do this. And so on. They're a little bit breathless. They're a little bit exploratory. And that can very well come across. So we're not constrained particularly by counting out the beats in a bar. I said I wasn't going to talk about fingering and pedalling and performance practice issues. I'm not, but I will just say for the pedal solo, alternate feet, alternate toes works perfectly. It's not a question of authenticity of what we should be doing. The easiest thing all the way through is alternate toes. It simply works better, so don't get tangled up in toes and heels and so on. There's only one note that doesn't fall into the alternate feet pattern, and that's the C, which is the penultimate note of bar 27, I think. But there it helps to jump with the same foot from the previous note because that heightens the articulation, and that's so often the case in Bach, that where alternate toes don't necessarily go in opposite directions, it coincides with points where we really want to heighten the articulation anyway. Incidentally, both the trills in that pedal solo are approached from the note above. We've talked several times about what to do in that particular situation. Here, I think in a pedal solo, we really don't have the time to do a great deal more than to start on the main note. So don't have any guilt there about starting the trill on the main note, because that is what fits most easily and gives you the most time for a trill. However we do it, a pedal trill cannot be as fast as a manual trill simply because the pipes don't speak as fast, so we don't want such rapid alternation. There's a small textual point, 3 notes from the end of bar 20, Some editions give a G and some an F. Bärenreiter gives a G. It doesn't necessarily feel entirely natural or what we expect. There are two main manuscript sources. Probably the most important one, the one which Bärenreiter is following, does give a G. An alternative source gives an F at that point, but the similar place about 2 bars earlier also has a different note than from the normally accepted text. So there are variant readings there, and we really can't get involved in which one is right. But just be aware of it if you need to. When we get into that next section, the main section of the toccata, things are going to get a little bit more metrical. We're thinking 4 clear beats in a bar. The quavers are not going to be slurred, I think. They're all going to have that slight normal Baroque adaptive non-legato. That pattern of a semiquaver and 2 demi-semiquavers, which is repeated as a scale, those are easier to play if we use the same fingers each time in that figure. Again, that does not need to be a legato, shouldn't even be a legato pattern. So we can very well jump from the one finger position to the next as we're going up. And the only general comment I would make is that it helps constantly to be aiming for the next cadence. Those cadences come thick and fast throughout the entire piece, so we don't ever need to think in very long terms. And this is a piece which I think does go from cadence to cadence. Although it does have a long-term plan, it doesn't depend on keeping the focus of attention over a long time span. The second movement is a slow dance, and here, above all, I think it's really important to sit down in a chair, close your eyes, and just imagine how that would be played by an orchestra if this was a movement in a concerto or a cantata or something like that. How would it actually sound? You see, when we're experimenting, we're sitting at the organ and we're playing and we think, oh, how should I articulate this? How should I phrase this? We don't really talk about phrasing in Bach, but how would I organize this on the keyboard? And that really is starting at the wrong end. Think about the ideal sound for that piece if it was not on the organ. So how would it actually sound? Just sit there for a moment and just think. I think that if we were listening to that and you have, for example, a little string orchestra with a continuo and perhaps a flute playing the melody, the accompanying instruments are going to have a very light lilt. Chum, 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 cha, da, 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 chum, cha, da, da, da. It's going to just bounce along very gently, and that flute is bearing the weight of the melody. But even that's not going to be particularly heavy because it has that light dotted rhythm. But it's certainly not going to be heavily slurred in any sense at all. And when we're playing it on the organ, let's play it like that. Why do something different if that is the ideal sound, if you like? But it's in that fugue that the comedy element of this piece is most evident. That fugue theme. Have you ever heard a fugue theme that's so daft? Dum ba dum bum 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 bum. Bum bum ba dum bum 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 bum. Bum bum ba, and so on. Completely disjointed, those odd rests, and this merry sort of caper. There's no fugue which is anything like that, except perhaps the D major one, which also goes unexpectedly in semiquavers with odd rests here and there. And there is a bit of the same spirit about that fugue too. But this one, the joke really carries on all the way to the very, very end. And you notice that it doesn't even have a proper ending. The piece just descends that long curly scale and kind of fades away and then just ends abruptly with a blomp. It's rather like a film where the hero gallops off into the sunset, going further and further and further away, and then falling off his horse right at the end. It really is a piece of comedy. And just before that, there is that scale, which I think any more recent composer would have written as a glissando. I think your listeners ought to be absolutely in stitches by that point. So how do we phrase that fugue subject? Well, you know the answer to that by now. We don't phrase it at all. It's lightly articulated. It feels natural to put a slight accent on the main beats. It's in 6/8, so there are 2 beats and a bar. And the counter subject, where that's running in quavers, those quavers can be just gently detached, just to keep the movement of the thing going. Semiquavers don't want to be obviously staccato or even very detached. They're just loosely attached. And that tends to work for Bach. The faster the notes are, the less individual articulation there is for each note. Once again, just as in the pedal solo earlier on, we notice that it is so much easier to play the pedal part of this fugue alternate toes. Once again, I'm not preaching this as a theoretical approach to 18th century playing. I'm saying that it is so much easier and so much cleaner to play it. We get very tangled up if we try to play this toe and heel. If you haven't played it alternate toes, give it a go and see what I mean. There are, once again, a couple of places where it doesn't fall automatically into left, right, left, right, left, right. And those places are places, as always, where it actually helps to heighten the correct articulation because we need to jump with the same foot. And that applies, for example, in bar 37, similar patterns. It also applies a little bit later on, bars 64 to 67, where we can jump with the same foot to land quite heavily on the main beat. And that is a positive thing. It's something which helps us to play rhythmically and with a good, solid articulation there. So it's all perfectly straightforward. We don't need to spoil the joke with very studied articulation. We don't need to take it too seriously. We just play it in a relaxed and easy manner and let Bach do all the heavy lifting. This is Bach's joke, and he can be in charge. So my old tutor was absolutely right. This is not a technically studied masterpiece of design. This is a bit of undergraduate humour. This is a rollick. It's a piece of fun. It's an extended joke. And I think if we play it in that way and don't try to make it more serious than it is, then we're putting it across as it was intended to be. So even where we're playing it for an exam or for an audition or whatever it is, we have a duty to put across what Bach is trying to say, and this is what Bach, I'm sure, is trying to say here. Laugh along with me, enjoy it, have fun. And so I say that to you as well, have fun.